Hello and welcome to this very special Scotsman rugby show ahead of the Six Nations. My name is Mark Atkinson, sports editor, and today I'm joined by our chief rugby writer Graham Bean and our columnist and former Scotland internationalist Fraser Brown. Six Nations is fast upon us. Next week it starts. We've got a Thursday kickoff. France against Ireland. We'll come to those two teams in a little bit, but there's only one place to start for us, and that is Scotland. Fourth place finish last year. Graham, there's been a lot of talk about the Scotland team, about head coach Gregor Townsend. Where do you stand on it all? What are your general expectations for Scotland in this edition of the Six Nations?
Well, I think, firstly, Scotland are trying to play down expectations more so than perhaps previous years. I think it's quite noticeable at the launch earlier this week. Both Gregor Townsend and Sione Tuipulotu were both kind of dampening down any great hopes supporters might have. They kind of, the language they were using was quite interesting. I thought Gregor was asked, are you expected to do well? In previous years, there's high hopes for you, and he was kind of distancing himself from that, saying, I don't think that has been the case. I don't think people do expect a lot from us. Which is clearly not true, because every year Scotland seem to be most people's dark horses. That's a sort of standard pre-Six Nations thing. People will say, are Scotland going to cause a few surprises? But I think he was relaxed and he was very kind of amiable and chatty, but he was definitely trying to kind of play down expectations around Scotland, which I thought was interesting.
Fraser, would you say that's a bit of mind games from Gregor this time around to take the pressure off the players, given what we've hoped for this generation for a number of years?
I don't know if I'd call it mind games. I think, I think Gregor's just trying to create some space for the players to be able to just focus on each game at a time. I think there'll still be a lot of belief within that squad. I think they'll believe they can win every game. There's not a team probably in the Championship that doesn't believe that they can go out and win every single game. That's not to say that you're going to go out and say you're going to win the Championship. That's just, it's natural within sport. It is to have that inner belief. There has been a lot of pressure piled on Scotland from internally within Scotland and externally from fans and from press alike over the last couple of years, and I think Scotland have probably the style of rugby and the results that Scotland have had over the last sort of 7 or 8 years, particularly since Gregor Townsend's come in. Those big victories and the upward curve that Scotland have been on, and some of the rugby that they played has sort of led into that, and I think there has been a huge amount of public support and a huge amount of admiration across probably the rugby world in terms of the players available, the style of rugby that Scotland can play, the type of results that Scotland can produce. But we've never been able to kind of produce 2 or 3 of those games in a row. So I don't think it's mind games. I think it's just, it is where they are. I think probably after the autumn they're just trying to focus on the here and now. And, the first 2 games are huge for Scotland with Italy away, which will be a huge challenge away in Rome to start the competition, and then England at Murrayfield.
When we preview every Six Nations, a lot of pundits and across the game will say, right, what is the baseline number of victories that Scotland should be aiming for? Does that carry more weight this time around, given that there's largely been a stagnation in terms of results? Do you think he's got to hit a magic number this time around, him and this team?
I don't think the SRU are thinking like that. It's been 2 wins the last 2 years, and I think people are looking for more than that, definitely. But it's very, very difficult, isn't it? I mean, where are these wins coming from? I think Fraser's right that first game in Rome is absolutely huge, and that's going to set the tone for Scotland. If they can win there, that'll be absolutely brilliant. And they'll go on that England game, which will be such a great occasion. That'll be absolutely brilliant. Murrayfield, Scotland, England, both teams, probably go into it on a high. But if they lose in Rome, it's going to be a different story altogether, and it's going to be a tough match. It's going to be a tough championship for Scotland. I think in the last 8 years of Gregor Townsend, I think perceived as a good championship is when we win 3 games. But that's not easy, It's not easy when you're playing the likes of France and England. but it's split between 2 wins and 3 wins. People would also like to see more than that. People would like to see Scotland get up there, be challenging for the title. Can they do it this year? I'm not so sure, but I think everybody would love to see 3 wins or more, but difficult.
As you say, Graham, they come into the back of this championship on a difficult autumn. For the first time I think I can remember, there were boos after a Scotland game at Murrayfield in a sort of football crowd style when they lost to Argentina, having a 21-point lead at one stage of the match. Fraser, did the reaction of the crowd surprise you or take you aback that day?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it did. I think the nature of just the last sort of 20 minutes of that game, I think probably took everyone by surprise. Well, everyone perhaps other than the Argentinians. I think there was a lot of emotional reactions after that game. You know, I did a post-match sort of video report, which, you know, I was very emotional because it was so raw, really unexpected. I think there was a lot of things written in the press and came out in the press the following week, the following 2 weeks, and I think just the shock of kind of that capitulation in the last 25 minutes. You know, they would, you know, to be 21-0 up and concede 34 points or 32 points it was in the last sort of 20 minutes. It was just really uncharacteristic of the Scotland team as well. You know, traditionally this has been a team over the last 5 or 6 years that's been very tight defensively. Even when there's been moments in games where they've maybe fallen off it, they've not conceded that many points and they've been able to wrestle back control. And I think that was maybe what was a little bit alarming. I don't think it was a reaction that had been probably built up over a long time. I think that's what it was. It was a very emotional reaction. So, and obviously it was a very disappointing day for Scotland and for Gregor Townsend and for that squad. In saying that, there's been, you know, 2 months between that and now. The bulk of the players have gone away. You know, there's a lot of players that have been at Glasgow Warriors in that time. And obviously they've been playing incredibly well, both in the league and in Europe. So I think we tend to cast our mind back because the most recent thing that we've seen from an international point of view was the autumn. But from a player and a management point of view, there's a lot of water that's gone under the bridge since then. And you tend to have just parked that. They will learn the lessons, and I hate that phrase, learning the lessons, but they'll try and carry the confidence from club form over the last couple of weeks into next weekend.
As you say, Fraser, Glasgow Warriors going really, really well. I think Jack Dempsey spoke recently about how it's not, you can't just flick a switch and take it from club to international rugby, but it does boost Scotland that there's so many players at Glasgow doing well. We talk about the home games. Scotland's 2 home games are this time around against England and France. Not easy, given that they are the front runners for this tournament. Fraser, do you see it as a straight shootout between France and England for the title?
Pretty much. I still think Ireland will be there. I think, you know, we can chat about Ireland. I think they had a difficult Six Nations last year, yet they still finished in the top half of the table. They've got a lot of quality players in there. I know they've got a lot of big injuries, but they're still a very quality side with an excellent coaching team. I think the 2 favourites at the minute are France and England. I think look at the form of England. I think the 14 matches. I think they're about 14 matches unbeaten run. I'm certain that'll be extended to 15 by the time they head up to Murrayfield with playing Wales in their first game. France, defending champions. You look at the quality of the squad. You look at the quality of the players that they've left out of the squad, and Damien Penaud and Gregory Aldred, and you understand just the depth that they have throughout the whole of France. You look at some of the selections. Selecting from teams in the top 14 that traditionally they haven't done, but they have that luxury because of the competition in that league and how well some of the players are playing. And when you look at France as well, you look at the power that they have up front. I'm certain they'll go in with 6-2 or even a 7-1 split on the bench for the majority of the Six Nations because they have that ability. They've got some excellent utility forwards, but they have that ability to be able to go on and almost dominate teams in the last 25 minutes with the forward power that they have. So they are the favourites. Obviously, the Six Nations will be hoping that those 2 are the favourites come the last weekend with a decider between England and France. And I think that's probably the way it's going to go.
Yeah, that's a last day shootout in Paris. Before that, it's Ireland-Scotland. We're jumping right to the very end, St. Patrick's Day. Ireland have had the Indian sign over Scotland now for what feels like an eternity. Certainly Gregor Townsend would love to get a victory over what has been his nemesis and during his tenure. Do you see a chance for Scotland to put that one to rest in this championship?
I do actually. I think we've mentioned the injuries that Ireland have, particularly in the front row. I think that's a big issue for them, particularly at loosehead. But in saying that, there's chances that Andrew Porter might be back fit for the end of the championship, so that'll be a huge boost. And Porter's always been one of Ireland's star players in any game against Scotland. I think again, obviously Bundy Aki got banned this week for 4 matches, but he'll be fit and available again for that final match against Scotland. So I think there'll be a stronger squad come the last 2 weekends. And saying that, I think a lot of their squad is aging. I think they've had a lot of rugby under their belts over the last 5 or 6 years. And even in the last 12 months, you think of how many of those players were on the Lions tour in the summer. And even with the way that they get rested and rotated at Leinster, there's a lot of rugby in those legs. The big thing about that is not the fact that there may be a diminishing force. It's the fact that with one less rest weekend in the Six Nations this year, do those sort of older players have the ability to back up 3 weeks on the bounce of big, intense, physical test match rugby, a week off, and then go again for 2 big games at the end of the championship? Andy Farrell's been brilliant for Ireland. He's been excellent. I agree with Graham with him back in. He has this aura and this presence and this calmness about him. The one criticism of him probably has been that they haven't managed to bring through enough younger players and kind of blood them and give them experience in that squad over the last 5 or 6 years. They've maybe been looking for those big victories, the Six Nations, the Grand Slams, the World Cups, and they've been so focused on that they've not brought through the talent behind. And I think that's where they're struggling now with injuries and with the age. That do they have the quality to come in and be able to perform at that level? I think Scotland obviously were really competitive in Dublin in 2020. I think 2 years ago was their best chance to win in Dublin. I commented on that match, and Scotland were excellent. I think where Scotland have been very good against Ireland in recent history is when they've tried to be really direct against them. They tried to narrow the pitch and they've tried to play through them, and they've had a lot of success. And it's not quite. Well, it's not the way that Scotland normally play. They like to put a lot of width on the ball. They like their forwards to be quite wide. They move the ball from touchline to touchline. But actually, when they've narrowed it up and they've been physical and confrontational against Ireland, they've had a lot of success, but they've not been able to do that for a full 80 minutes. In Dublin 2 years ago, at Murrayfield 3 years ago, they had periods in those games where they were really dominant. But for whatever reason, they went away from that. They went back to their traditional standard type of playing, and it gave Ireland footholds back into the game. So I think this is probably their best opportunity to win in Dublin if they get the tactics right, if they get the game plan and the selection right. But Ireland is still a quality side. Like, I agree with Graham, they're going to be right in the mix come the end of the tournament. And that game actually might determine, Ireland's fate, whether they're finishing in the top 2 or whether it's a straight shootout between Ireland and Scotland for that 3rd place.
Fascinating to talk about the top of the table. We should maybe mention the mythical wooden spoon. We're obviously hoping that Scotland aren't involved in that. But everyone seems to think that there's a fairly sort of straight shout here between Wales and Italy for bottom spot. Graham, is it as straightforward as that? Are people underestimating the Italians in particular? We know that there's a lot of issues around Welsh rugby right now. But ultimately, do you see it between those two, or do you think those two teams can have a say in this tournament as well?
I think they definitely can, yeah. I mean, I think it's fascinating. Wales under Steve Tandy will be really interesting. Watch, see how they go. But they've got a really tough start, Wales. I mean, they've got England away to start and then France at home. That's you couldn't pick 2 tougher games to start with. But then they've got Scotland at Cardiff, and they've not won a Six Nations game at Cardiff for, I think it's close to 4 years, it just seems incredible. But they ran Scotland close the last time there 2 years ago, and I remember sitting in the stands there, and the noise was incredible as Wales kind of staged this comeback. They were getting closer and closer to Scotland. I think they scored 4 unanswered tries. And, the roof almost came off by the end. That level of support they get there is incredible. And I think they could, surprise a few people. The final game is Wales-Italy in Cardiff. And I fancy Wales to win that, definitely. So I don't think, I think I think Italy could be bottom this time.
Fraser, do you agree with that?
Look, it's always a lot easier after the first game. I think, if Italy win in Rome against Scotland, then they'll carry confidence throughout the Six Nations. If they lose, they'll be really competitive in all the games. So I think if they lose, then it will come down to that last game in Cardiff. Like Wales, I really do feel for the Welsh management and the Welsh players, because the Six Nations isn't just about rugby. It's about sort of the political rugby landscape in Wales, and I feel the management and the players are having to come out at the minute, and they're having to almost apologise and talk about the political background of Wales rather than the build up to their Six Nations and how they're transforming and they're changing as a squad. I actually think there's such tough games to start, but I think their perfect game to start the Six Nations would have been England away, because it's backs against the wall. It allows them to bring all that emotion to a fixture that's so passionate and so close to the heart for a lot of Welsh people. So I actually think it's a brilliant fixture for them to start. But if it doesn't go well the first two games, then that's a very difficult Six Nations for them. I think also the manner of the performance in the first couple of weekends will make the last 2 weeks really interesting for them. They struggle to sell tickets in the autumn. There's still tickets on sale at the minute for their home games. I think if they put in performances to be proud of, I think if they give the Welsh public a team to be able to get behind, I think they have to go out and score some points. I think they've got to kind of demonstrate the best side of Welsh rugby. That they played a lot of attacking rugby in the autumn, but without necessarily getting a lot of success. They haven't scored a lot of tries, but I think if they can get almost bums back on seats come those last couple of home games against Scotland and against Italy, then they will have that crowd, they will have that support, that noise behind them. And I think there's no better team in the Six Nations or there's no worse team, to play against in the Six Nations than Wales in Cardiff, with emotion, with passion, with physicality, and a crowd behind them. So it's going to be a really difficult Six Nations for them. I think they'll be tested with their squad depth. I think they'll be tested between which style of rugby they want to go. I think if they want to play hard to beat defensive, I think they'll be in the games, all the games till the end. Do I think they're going to pick up enough points to avoid a wooden spoon? Probably not. I think they need to score some tries and pick up either losing bonus points or 4-try bonus points. I think Italy will do that with the quality in their backline. So certainly it's going to come down to that last game, but I think Wales will probably finish last. I just see the start for them just too difficult a hurdle to get over.
Interesting. Graham, you dealt with Steve Tandy, media duties for a number of years. Did it always strike you that he was going to become a head coach in his own right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously very good at what he does and very widely respected in the rugby world. He got the Lions gig 4.5 years ago in South Africa for defence coach, and obviously a proud Welshman, and the chance to go and become head coach of Wales was one he obviously couldn't turn down. I think he's thoroughly deserves it for the work he's done with Scotland and before that. And I think he's the right man for the job. Definitely bring a bit of stability there, and I hope he does well.
He spoke very well during the Six Nations launch earlier this week, as did Gonzalo Calzado, the Italian head coach. Just very briefly on Italy, what can we expect from them when Scotland play them in Rome? Have they evolved in the past 12 months as a nation?
They have, certainly since he's come in as head coach. Italy over the last sort of 7 or 8 years have always had a bucket load of talent. They've had players that are able to break the game line, players that are able to score. Big competitive pack. The set piece has always been strong. It's always been a battle. The Scotland Italy games have not been a damn squid, but they've almost suffocated themselves at times, because the forwards tend to neutralise themselves a little bit, and it's later in the game that they break up and points are scored. I think since he's come in as head coach, they've certainly been more pragmatic. They certainly play more percentage rugby. They're less likely to take risks inside their own half. There's a lot more structure in their exits. They look to get higher up the pitch, and they're not trying to expend too much energy 40, 50, 60 metres from their own line. They're sort of conserving their energy to try and attack. Their kicking game's improved, their contestable kicking game's improved, their defence is improved as a result of that. they're making less errors, which are then punishable in their own third. And they've got some serious threats, particularly in that midfield. You look at like Brex and Minicello. They're big name players, and there's some top quality there. There's no surprise at the clubs that they're playing at in Europe. So they're a very, very dangerous team. Again, they're starting to get more depth come through, and that's always been the one of the issues for Italy. A lot like Scotland is that, if they're missing big players or in that last 20 minutes a game, there's always a significant drop off. And the style of rugby they've tried to play has not helped that. They put themselves under a lot of pressure. The game next weekend in Rome, that's going to be one hell of a test for Scotland. Italy will go in there all fired up. They'll be very confident after the autumn as well. Obviously they were really competitive against South Africa. Obviously they ended up losing that one, by a decent margin. But they beat Australia in the autumn, and they'll be full of confidence. They know that they've got the game that can stress anyone. For them, it'll be about, can they play as error-free a game as possible to give them the opportunity, because they know they'll score points.
You're not filling me with that much optimism now about next weekend after a glowing endorsement of Italy. I know time is rattling on. I'm going to ask you both, gents, for a couple of players that you are really looking forward to watching during the Six Nations, who you think might light up the tournament. I'll go to you first, Graham. Give me a couple of names that you think are going to star in this tournament.
Well, I'll go for the obvious one. First of all, I think it'd be great to see Dupont back playing for France. But I'm also fascinated by the kind of dynamic with Jalibert, who's been brought back into the France squad. I know there's something you mentioned, Fraser, earlier in the week, but they've had, he walked out on the France squad last season when he wasn't getting picked, and I just think that sort of drama around the French team is great. Also, I'd love to see Freddie Douglas getting a chance over the next few weeks. I know he's still very young, but I think it'd be great to see him playing for Scotland. Really exciting player. Okay.
Hard to argue with those two, Graham. Fraser, mic is yours on that one.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the relationship between Dupont and Jalibert. If Jalibert gets picked, obviously with Thomas Ramos in that squad, that's why he walked out last year, because Ramos, who's obviously traditionally a 15, got picked ahead of him at 10. So that could be, that has the potential to do to France what often happens to French teams and completely derail their Six Nations if that's not handled correctly. But I'm really, I hope Jack Dempsey and Jamie Dobby are back fit for Scotland's Six Nations, because I think the form that they've carried in, I'd love to see them bring that into a Scotland team. I think they've been probably the best players in Europe over the last 6 weeks. Edwin Adogbu, I'd love for him to get some game time for Ireland. I think, he's a very young man and he's still very raw, but the potential that he has, a little bit like when Itoje broke into the scenes, his potential that he has to be able to kind of transform that Irish back row, his skill set, his power, be fascinating to see if how he gets utilised and if he gets a lot of game time. And then just because, I think England is so powerful at the minute, I think, any one of those English wingers, Freeman, Feo Boso, Arundel, if any of them get ball and space and plenty of ball, like BLBR did last year, they've got the potential to light up the tournament.
Final question from me then, straightforward. Who's winning the Six Nations? I'm going to go back to you, Fraser. You get the first shot at this one.
I just can't see past France. I think the fixtures run in their favour. I think they've probably got the best squad. The power that they've got up front with Dupont back in there. Obviously, we just chatted about the 9-10 axis, but with Dupont in there and the creativity that he brings and the rest of the back line. And that game, their final game being against England in Paris at the end of the tournament, I think, it'd be very difficult to see anyone other than France winning. I don't think they'll win a Grand Slam. I think they will lose, I think. But I think they'll just have enough.
Graham, are you on the same page as Fraser?
Yeah, very much so, yeah. I think France, and I think it might actually be a Grand Slam, but we'll see.
Interesting. Well, we've got loads coming on Scotsman.com. We've got a special Six Nations section on the website launching later today. We've got a special pullout in the weekend newspapers, and there'll be loads of content across all our channels in the build-up to next week's start, and then the subsequent couple of months of international rugby. We can't wait for it. Thanks for joining us. We'll also have Fraser's thoughts weekly ahead of the games, and also afterwards. He's got a brilliant tactical breakdown as well of all Six Nations going out this weekend. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me enjoy the Six Nations, enjoy what's about to come, and we'll speak again soon.